Alrighty, so thank you all for joining us for our third in a series of webinars with Matthew Soccer technical staff. For those of you who don't know me, and I think everybody on here does, I'm Tommy GEIS. I'm the Matthew Soccer Assistant Technical Director. And the purpose of this webinar is to start talking about playing time, an issue that probably hits everybody at some point or another, whether it's during tryouts or during the season or just how you manage your season going through. So I was fortunate enough that I was able to follow Lawyer Bina's webinar on behavior management on Wednesday night and Ian's yesterday afternoon on skill acquisition, because playing time really encompasses all of those. So hopefully this is going to be interactive, and I'm going to ask for lots of feedback from you, or lots of moments for you to add some information into the chat box and just give your thoughts as we go through the process. So to start, a question for us all to think about, and when the question pops up, take about 20 seconds, and Rob will work on filtering it through, but answer the question of, in your opinion, how much playing time should each player be guaranteed in a game? 20 seconds starting now. Let's see what we can come up with.
If you guys want to type into the chat box any answers, that'd be appreciated. Jose Isidro, half a game. Lawrence, depends on age. Garrow, a third. Rick, how are you? U13 and younger, 50%. Dave Suvak, 50%.
Okay, so let's go on from there, and hopefully we come up with something that we have our opinions on, but by the end, hopefully we can come up with something that we agree upon or come closer to agreeing on what minimum time should be for the players as we go through. So a good place to start the discussion is with documents that U.S. Soccer is called. It's called Player Development Initiatives, the PDIs. And in the PDIs, they put out a recommendation of every player should be guaranteed at least 50% of each game. In some cases, coaches try to justify it by making an average throughout the season. Sometimes you're playing a good game, so they give players less time. Sometimes they're not playing as strong as a team, so they give them more time. And at the end, they say it averages to 50%. But I don't think that's really what it means, because players need to be out on the field all the time and experience all the things, the goods and the bads, as they go through. I was guilty of that as much as anybody else, justifying the playing time by the opponents and say it averages out at the end. But sometimes I look back on it and wonder or not if I was really doing what's in the player's best interest. So when we think about playing time, we have to consider, what are the needs of the child? Why are the children out there to play? So think about it and take another 20 seconds in the comment box and think of the reasons that you think kids are actually playing the game. Take that 20 seconds now.
So Tommy, question from Dave Suvak. What is the context age, U6 to U18?
I think as we go through, that's what we can come away with at the end, because it's going to be down to the coaches and the environment and hopefully the information that we share throughout.
So answers to this question, Karen Kelser. Hey, Karen. Fun learning, being with friends. Steve Russo, competition for older players. Claudia, children need to feel like they belong. Maureen, joy of the game, opportunity to get better, develop friendships. Tony Marino, love of competition and fun. Dave Suvak, fun, friends, and fitness.
So thanks for all those. Ian had mentioned this yesterday in his webinar, and he addressed the basic needs of a child, and I think we've mentioned them. Have fun, to develop or learn the game, and hopefully have a sense of belonging, feel like they're a part of something. So the decisions we make should be revolving around these. If this is what the children are there for, then how could we as coaches help steer them in the direction of solving those or of achieving those? So we think about this, and now we're the coaches. The children are signed up. The parents are entrusting their kids with us, and hopefully that's a good thing for them. So what are their expectations? We think about what should the parents and the children expect from us as coaches? And this comes down to, we hope they're going to enjoy it. We provide them dignity and respect. We're hoping that they're learning how to play the game, and we're creating a safe environment for them. So let's look at each of these and especially focus on, take a step back. How many of you, by shows of thumbs up, have taken a grassroots course? Any grassroots coaches, licensed coaches out there? Rob, am I frozen?
Nope. People are giving you thumbs up.
Okay, thank you.
4v4s, there's in the chat box lots of comments about which different courses they've taken. A couple of grassroots instructors as well on the call.
So hopefully from the grassroots courses, you remember this slide in all the grassroots courses. And in particular, note the column that talks about dignity and respect. And it shows an area that every child should be guaranteed at least 50% of the playing time. That's what they're signing up for. Hopefully that's what is going to be a part of their why they're there. 50% of the playing time should help meet that fun and development, and that sense of belonging has to become with playing time for them. So, thinking along those lines, and take a moment to add these into the comment box. We think about playing time. How do we manage a starting lineup? So as coaches, when you show up at the field and your players are there and you have your opponents, what considerations do you take into account when you put your starting lineup together? Take 20 seconds and add some comments into the comment box.
So Garrow mentions chemistry. Paul B, who showed up for practice. Hussein, practice attendance as well. Team chemistry from Rick, attending the practice prior to game day. Yeah. Garrow, I'm going to unmute you if you want to give us an explanation of what you mean by chemistry.
A little bit of a combination of people playing well together during practice, having a good rapport with one another, as well as me striving to, want to take that next step to show me that they're ready for a challenge. That's what probably, separates the people who want to, take that next step into the starting lineup and the people who, are not there yet, but can see that they have a chance to be in the future, kind of like a motivational tool.
Thank you. So Tommy, just to follow up on that, strengths and qualities of the players, being able to maintain level and objectives from Karen, Dave Suvak's balance level, a mix of players and positional strengths from Brandon, game readiness from Mavis, type of opponent that we're playing.
Great, thanks for those. So I've also put a list together. How many of these did we address? I think we're kind of going down the same path here. And I don't think these are the only answers, but I think it's some considerations to put in. Actually, through a conversation I had with Rob yesterday, he actually had one to add to this that he had mentioned was sometimes that kid that's just going above and beyond, helping out at practice, helping with the cones, helping clean up at the end of practice. So almost throwing that kid a bone who just is willing to do a little bit more than just what most of the players are doing. So things to think about. Over the years, when we get into conversations about playing time and conversations with coaches, I've heard so many reasons why players' time should be limited, but not so many conversations about why they get more, and a lot of them are hard to really wrap your head around. So for existence, some reasons that kids may not play a whole lot, that they get overwhelmed when the big game time comes, or the other players get frustrated because he or she is not as good as they are, or they have to earn the right to play. Maybe they miss practice. And I'm quite sure if we start thinking about it, this list can grow and grow and grow with all the reasons why kids should play. However, let's review these and discuss ideas to support the players instead of leaving them behind. So for each of these, we'll take a moment and use that 20 seconds again and add thoughts to the comment section about what you think. So the first one, he or she gets overwhelmed in the big games. What are your thoughts about that? How would you deal with those players who possibly the game is too fast for them, or anything that you could say the game is overwhelming for them? Add your thoughts.
So Karen Kels has added, give simple directions to enhance their ability to control things. Lawrence has said, I have often done and thought this. Now I realize that they need to gain the experience by doing. Steve Russo, find the best role they can play in the game. Garrow, keep it simple, have simple goals, attainable goals for them. Paul B, try to get them to relax, provide some simple direction. Tony, echoing the sentiments of others, you can't learn to swim without getting into the pool, but then you shouldn't force them to do it as well. Hussein, talk to them, help them build confidence. Link to Claudia, ask them if they're ready.
Thank you for that. So, ultimately, I think where it comes down to is we take it back to the 6 tasks of a coach, which we hopefully remember from our grassroots courses. But what do we say to the players about even before the game or before they go into the game that could possibly help them with their anxiety? As adults, hopefully we could talk them down from being overwhelmed and get them out on the field in a situation where they could be a little bit more comfortable. Also, think about when I'm getting ready to put them on the field, instead of just throwing into the fire, ask them to observe or take a look at the game and see what they see and see if they could come up with some ways that they're going to deal with what they might seem to be a struggle. So instead of just throwing them into the fire, think about ways that you could put them out on the field with specific tasks that they could try to achieve throughout the game. And then finally, think about how we can help them. where they can be most comfortable on the field, at least to start, because ultimately we want to try to get them out of their comfort zone. But sometimes getting them into the game and getting them playing, we might realize that their comfort zone can expand, get a little bit bigger as we go through. So thanks for those ideas. The next one to think about is, how do you manage it when you see the other players are frustrated by the lack of ability from any given player on the field? How do you manage that? Let's take another 20 seconds and see what we could come up with. Rob, how are we doing with the comments?
Yeah, starting to come in. So related to this one, maybe this playing time help players experience different problems and give them different opportunities to express themselves. Steve Russo asked those players what they are doing to help the other players. Ask other players how they can help support the person in their success in games. Tony Marino moves cranky players into positions that are unnatural to them. Ask them to remember what it's like to struggle. I think that building empathy, that's a really great point. One of the Ian Mulliners, this has got to be Loy, help the players to tell you what he or she needs to do on the field. This way the demands come from them. Dave Suvak, ask better players to become leaders and help weaker players. Hussein, encourage other skilled players to help and support. And Claudia, tell them how the game is a team game, so it depends on how we work with one another.
Sure. So I think in this sense, it comes down to another task of a coach where we are now leading the team. How do we create that environment within our team? This is an important topic to address because we know we're going to have team meetings and we know we try to sit down and think about what we're trying to achieve. So as a coach and during that meeting, how can we address this with your team and create agreed upon team behaviors? For the coach, sending a player into a game who may be struggling, think about ways that we could get them out on the field, maybe closer to their best friend or closer to somebody who's a stronger player, and putting them out on the field in a situation where there's somebody there to help. So ultimately, think about ways we could arrange this ahead of time with the team, but also make that connection with the players as they get out on the field so that they're working together instead of just isolating the player who may be struggling. The next one, another 20 seconds. And this is the one that, before you start writing about it, this is one I tend to cringe when I hear because I'm not really sure what is meant by this. I think it reflects back to training sessions, but it's still a little bit on the vague side. Earning your play time versus your right to play. This can be an issue with relationships between the player and the coach, or simply maybe the player just doesn't understand what the expectations are. However, what do you think about this statement or this obstacle, and how do you manage it with the players to try to get them to put in the efforts that you'd hope you would get?
Tommy, can you define harder?
Well, that's the one where I think the vagueness comes in. Because when you're asking a player to work harder, that's where I struggle with when I've heard this is, what do you exactly mean by that? Do you want the player to run more? Do you want the player to get in more on tackles? It's just an obstacle that I've heard, and that's why I want to put it out to the coaches and see what their take on this is.
Jeff mentions that work harder could equal paying attention, less goofing off. Jose said at the town level, this can be very difficult to enforce. Tony, great point. Is there something else going on in their lives to distract the player? You got to take a deeper dive into the psyche.
Any others?
Steve Russo, only applicable to players not paying attention or trying very little. So it seems to be behavior focused predominantly. Rick Miana, putting in the effort. Rick, I'm going to open up your mic. So if you can give us some examples, I think that would be very helpful to the group.
Yeah, so you have a player that hasn't missed a practice session and shows up on time, is ready to play, and just goes out and gives their all. They may not be the best player, or not have the skill of the other kids, but he's definitely putting in the effort. He's definitely trying his best and working hard, like what we said.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks for that.
Karen's come up with a great point regarding travel. Is committing to the players that you've selected to travel with you. Lots of different levels of play are on this call. So if you've got teams that are traveling 4 or 5 hours and giving the answer that you need to work harder to earn playing time, then perhaps they need to be put on a team at a level where they'll be able to play and gain more success.
Great, thanks for that, Karen. And I think I would agree with that, because these are the players that we selected and put into an environment knowing that some may struggle. But if we look at this as, again, another task of a coach, how do we lead? What are we doing to lead those players? And if we believe in the basic needs of the players, which was discussed, or the basic need of a child, they want to have fun, they want to develop, and they want to have a sense of belonging. Think about how important it is to let them enjoy these moments with their teammates. Not everybody on the field is always going to be the best player, and effort. This is where the cringe part, because I said work harder. It's immeasurable, because is putting in less effort but getting more of a result a definition of working harder? Or, as Rick had mentioned, that person who's busting his butt every practice or working their hardest every practice but just doesn't have the tools, does that get taken into consideration for playing time? The other one to consider, the other consideration of it is, how often do we look at ourselves as a root cause of the issue? Are we creating an environment for the players that encourages them to want to put in more effort, to want to work harder, just because that's what's making it fun and helping them to develop within the group that they're a part of? So it could be our job to also try to match up with that to make it better for them, because that might be what makes that player tick. So the final one to add some comments to, and this is one that I think we've hinted to already, but again, it comes up all the time. And even when we're selecting players along the way, or we have tryouts, there's the A team or team one, the blue team, whatever color direction you want to put with it, is how do we manage the players who miss practice, or he or she misses practice, therefore they shouldn't get as much playing time? Add your thoughts on that. 20 seconds.
We go, Tommy. Just following up on some points from earlier. Players and coaches need to agree on the definitions and set expectations ahead of time. Pre-season meetings from Loy and Rick. Missing practices. We have if they miss a practice for one reason or another, I do not limit their playing time because of it, but I do understand that their development might be hastened by missing practice. That comes from Nate. Brandon, depends on the reason for missing practice. Sometimes it will be the parents. Dave Suvak, stick with principles of 50%. Maybe it's the parents' fault. Lots of mention of the parents. And Rick mentions transport. It's a tough one if the player can't walk or drive themselves to the session.
Well, thanks for all those. And I think a lot of them revolve around that it's hard to put a concrete definition or concrete standards in for players to miss practice. So if we think about it, this also goes back to one of the tasks of a coach, and possibly two tasks of a coach: leading the player and also leading the team with those agreed upon team standards and how we're going to manage the situation as it comes. And as mentioned in there, I think a lot of times we have to start with the why. And coaching for 20 plus years in Pittsburgh, I just assumed that's the way it was because that's the way everybody did it in my environment. But when I moved to Alaska, a friend and a colleague suggested to me that before I start judging or making decisions on anything, and it wasn't just substitutions and playing time, it was basically soccer in general, that make sure you understand the reasons why it's happening this way. There's reasons that kids are running late, and I'm sure we've all heard stories along the way on why, and some reasons are better than others, but regardless, in their mind, those reasons are pretty concrete. I've heard stories of kids that have to babysit their younger brother and sister, get them off the bus, make sure they're doing their homework, feed them dinner before they go to practice, and then parents getting home from work are struggles, which different clubs have different ways of dealing with it. But it's all those things we have to take into consideration. Why is this being a problem? The other thing that we think about is that we've all been in situations where we get pulled in different directions. And coaches that are coaching multiple teams are struggling to get from one field to the next, or just life. Look what's going on right now. The directions, even though we're not getting pulled out of our bubbles per se, but we do feel that there's so much going on that our time does get spread out quite a bit. We just need to challenge those things. So ultimately, punishing a child who may have been doing what they have depending upon or being late because of what's going on in their home life. Maybe they were just out doing a good deed, or maybe it's just because their parents get them there. All these things have to be taken into consideration. And as coaches, just because we may not think it's a good excuse to miss, well, if we're there for the kids and bringing them in to be a part of this, we hope that we take all those into consideration. Anybody have any comments or thoughts or suggestions they'd like to share with that, with playing time, before we go on?
Yeah, Tommy, we're going to jump to a question that Mavis had in regards to a player that enters the game. So if a player enters a game and then suddenly their and ultimately the team's performance drops, perhaps they start letting in goals and it takes the fun out of the game, how do you handle that?
Well, I think ultimately it comes down to and one of the slides has it on here, a John Wooden statement is, it's very difficult to say that a team is winning because of an individual player or losing because of an individual player. You've seen games at higher levels that when a sub goes on, or even before a sub goes on, the game tends to teeter back and forth. So for me, I think that comes down to the second point of looking back at the coach. What's actually going on? Besides the obvious, yes, we're giving up goals, we're breaking it down, but it does tend to go deeper than one player. Maybe I don't have the players matched up in the right way. Maybe I put all my stronger players on at the beginning of the game, or I put all my stronger players on as forwards, and now we're just trying to find a way to balance it out because we're not making the connections on the field. So I would suggest to look deeper into the situation as opposed to the player and figure out, okay, along with the player and the group of players that are on the field, how can we manage that?
Good to move on.
Yep. Any other questions or comments that people would care to share?
Specific question from Hussein. While it's unfair to punish a kid for actions beyond their control, how do you handle a player missing practice so he or she can ref a game, a U8 game on a Friday?
That's a loaded question in a sense because for me, I always think the kids should be playing. When at the youth level, playing the game of soccer should be important to them, and it should take precedence over them. However, I also know several of the kids in my neighborhood and in my town, and even growing up, that if you want to do things in your life, in your social life, you have to pay some of those bills. So some of these kids that have jobs because they need to pay for whatever. They have to pay for a portion of their soccer, or they have to pay for a portion of whatever else might be going on in their life. It's tough to tell them not to work. And especially the younger kids, refereeing is one of the few places that younger kids can actually try to get out there and make some money. So I think it's a challenging situation. Rob, do you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share?
Throw me under the bus.
Yep. Well, because I'm
Yeah,
only
again,
saying that because you're as a club director, you're probably seeing that more so than I am.
Yeah, we have players that have missed practices to referee games. I mean, typically it depends on when the conflict arises, what should be a priority at that time. So again, it's always on an individual basis, but I think that the key thing is putting the needs of the player first. If they're in a position where they need to referee a specific level of games or number of games to move on, and that's something that they want to do and develop a career in, it's their choice to make the commitment.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or from coaches involved in the call?
Lawrence mentions it's like being in two sports, commitments are to both, and he thinks that games should trump practices.
Actually, there's a good part of me that agrees with him on that. Kids, I think, really have to take the opportunity to play. I mean, that's the fun part, at least for me. But I've also known a few referees that actually are passionate about doing that as well. So, Lawrence, thank you for that.
So, Tommy, when I was working in a club, we decided to have a policy in which we gave players and parents, of course, depending how long the season is, like 2 days that they can miss at any given time. Okay? We even made it so loose that they said, you don't even have to tell us. Don't show up, and I'm fine. But then we say, there is not going to be any punishment. There is not going to be anything that you're going to pay for missing the 2 days. But if then you miss the third, the fourth, then we need to have a chat, okay, to figure out why is you missing. So that way we say to the players and the parents, if you're going to do something that you have to do it in these days that you have, okay, that you can miss practices because you have 2 days. We call them green light days, green lights, and you'll be fine. Okay, and believe it or not, in this club in New Jersey, all of a sudden, people didn't seem to be missing in practices as much as we put that rule, or we gave that choice to the parents, and the communication improved because the parents, even though we told them you don't have to tell us anything, the parents say, "Hey, my son is not going to be there because he have to referee a game." Oh, fantastic! Okay, so
Lloyd, let me cut you off a second because I have a question for or along those lines of, and I'm only saying this because we were both coaching club and finished coaching club before we came into Mass Youth at a similar time, in a different time, in a different place. And in that time, there was much more of a sense of dictatorship from the club to the players. Whereas today, it's more about agreed upon. And when we start setting these standards or expectations for the players, are these all things that are agreed upon with the players from the organization, or are these things that are dictated to them from the organization?
well, the way it happened, I was the DOC at that time, and the coaches had this problem. And then when I say, okay, what do you want? And he says, make a rule. And I say, well, we cannot make a rule because if the kid is 9 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, he doesn't drive himself. Now, if the kid is in high school and he's driving himself, then the responsible is him or her. So believe it or not, we got a parent meeting, a big parent meeting, big. And we were even surprised about the amount of people who attended. And they came up with that. They came up with that. I mean, of course, between the president of the club, myself, and another board member who was a development psychologist, kind of like they manipulated the situation. But the parents came out, let's say, what about if we miss 2 days? There is no penalty, but at the third days, we sit down and chat to see how can we perhaps solve the problem, or we have a problem, etc., etc. That came from them, not from us. Then what we say, okay, this is the deal. Do you all agree? Yes, we do. And then it was enacted the next season because it was like halfway through the season. Okay, let's say it happened in the fall. So it was enacted when the spring season came about, and it worked like a charm.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to open it up to some of the other coaches, and a question throughout to them is we talk about the player development, and ultimately you have to be there to develop. I mean, you can't develop a player who's not there with you. But a discussion point that people could actually unmute themselves or type it in the comment is if they do come to every practice, and this is just something to think about, if they do come to every single practice, how's that going to change things? What will that change in their pathway or helping them to possibly achieve what they want to get out of soccer? Throwing that out there for discussion if anybody would like to answer on that.
Tommy, while people are typing in, Garrow made the comment that conversation that you and Lloyd were having, it makes the preseason team meetings significantly more valuable. Hussein agrees and says, don't forget to send out the minutes a couple of weeks after, because people tend to forget what goes on in those meetings.
Absolutely.
No other comments in there at the moment.
Yep, I think those are great points to make because a lot of times you have a discussion and there's never a scribe available. And then we try to have some accountability, which doesn't always work out. So getting those meeting notes out to everybody with the agreed upon solutions that you came up with together, I think is very important. So if there's no other comments, we'll move on. Then wrapping it up a little bit earlier, but we will still be staying on for quite a while. If there are
Aaron mentioned to me appreciation to the commitment of the player that does attend every practice should be shown, and hopefully that translates to great progress.
Sure. I think that's a great comment, and I appreciate it, because the kids have to be somewhat accountable for their own development and their own growth, at least take a portion of it. But I think this next slide kind of might sum it up a little bit for us. So take a moment and read this little poem I found. And as you read through that, or hopefully as you're finishing up reading through that, think about, as coaches, how many of us also have the hat of being a parent and have to deal with all the different opportunities that are out there for the kids, and which one is the best one for them. Now, we're all soccer junkies, so obviously soccer should be first on everybody's plate. But there's other things out there that kids are passionate about also. And how could we help them get out of the game of soccer what they hope to get out of the game of soccer, more so than what their parents might want to get out, or what the adults involved want to get out of it? Can we help them achieve what their goals are through the game of soccer? So having said that, thank you all very much for attending the webinar. And I look forward to seeing you at one of our upcoming webinars next week and over the next several weeks. Believe me, I'm not in a rush to leave. I'm stuck in my bubble like the rest of you are. So if there's any questions or comments or anything you'd like to share, I'll be more than happy to stay on for the next several moments to either just have a conversation or do some questions and answers, up to you. But for everybody, please stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you on an upcoming webinar.
Thank you very much, Tommy.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for joining in.
Tommy.
Hopefully everything is good. You're very welcome, Karen. Great seeing you again.
Great to see you too. See you next week.
All righty, looking forward to it.
Me too.
No more questions that have come in, Tommy. Just lots of thank yous. I think you can see the chat box now, right?
Yep.